Penn State On Demand is a service of Penn State Public Broadcasting, and now you can support WPSU when you shop online. Visit WPSU.org/shop to make purchases from national online retailers, and WPSU will receive a portion of the sale with no extra cost to you. So start your online shopping at WPSU.org/shop.
I do some consulting work on American
feeling in the room was
don't ever say to her that what about the Chautauqua Institute?
Introductory discussion on the ethical aspect, more of a community.
Before China took back over.
Currently doing in autism.
If Facebook were a country, it would be the third largest in the world. There's little question that the advent of social media has irrevocably impacted human interaction. But what exactly is social media doing to us, and how is it changing our identities? Shyam Sundar is the founder of the Penn State Media Effects Research Laboratory, a leading facility of its kind in the country. His research investigates the social and psychological effects of social media. We'll talk with him about shifting norms and etiquette in the age of social media, about the reliability of online information, and about what interactivity might look like for future generations. Here's our conversation with Shyam Sundar. Shyam Sundar, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
You have an eclectic background, degrees in communications and in engineering. You spent 8 years as a print journalist and before joining academia, and then starting what became the Penn State Media Effects Research Laboratory, which is one of the leading facilities of its kind in the country. What sparked your interest in new media in the first place?
Well, it's a combination of my background in engineering and my interest in journalism. So I was an engineering student by day and a journalist by evening and night. Newspapers go to bed at 11 at night, so I would finish my school and then come to a newsroom and work for the rest of the day. And so I had this dual life for a long time. And then once I finished my undergrad, it kind of crystallized that my interest really was in media and that engineering was kind of the backbone of it. And so as I did graduate work, I became more interested in psychological issues, how people respond to media and so forth. And so it's not just the engineering, but also the human aspect of it. And so my PhD and my work thereafter is a blend of that, the technology and the human psychology and how they both come together to negotiate what we call communication.
So this laboratory, which you founded and now co-direct, you research, as you just mentioned, the social and psychological effects of social media. What kinds of questions are you trying to answer?
Well, the Media Effects Research Laboratory looks at all kinds of effects of media. It could be effects of media messages, as in the effects of media violence or pornography or health communication or advertising and so forth. It could also be the effects of particular formal features that we use in media, like cuts and edits and different kind of takes, point of view shot, and those kinds of features of form.
And how that affects consumers.
And how that affects the way you process information. What I do personally is more the effects of technology itself, not just the effects of messages or features or form, but rather the effects of technological affordances, as I call, or action possibilities that people can do with technology. Things like interactivity or navigability, how these days in media you navigate different spaces, like in virtual environments like Second Life and so forth. So it's not just about passively receiving communication, but actually doing something with it. And those are the effects of those are what I'm studying on human psychology, not just the way they process information, but also how they perceive that content after having interacted with it and so forth.
And how would you say social media is changing us? How is it reshaping our identities?
Social media are actually letting us not only be agentic. In other words, it's empowering us to kind of express our agency, our own self as source. Like I said, each one of us can be a broadcaster, but it also is giving us very good cues about what others are doing or what others like about you, for example. So there are two things that social media, the socialness of social media gives us. Those two things are basically kind of a bandwagon effect, which is what are all the other people doing? So these days, when we go to buy a book on Amazon.com, for example, we want to know how many stars it has, or how many people have bought this book, or what are people who looked at this book also bought, kind of thing. Or we don't book a hotel room these days without looking at reviews. And so we need that kind of, we've become used to it now. 10 years ago, we would just call some number and make a hotel reservation. It's unthinkable now, right? So in that sense, it gives us what's the general consensus or bandwagon around a particular issue or a topic or whatever it is, that product even. The other thing is it gives you external validation for what you do. So in other words, if you have your own Facebook site and you post something, the fact that 15 other people commented on it gives you some kind of validation of yourself. So on the one hand, social media help you kind of express agency, but on the other hand, it also gives you a sense of community around that.
What advice would you give to people about how to use social media most effectively and in a way that preserves their privacy?
Well, I think one has to be agentic in the way they use social media. It's not so much, you should not use social media just to kind of be out there, but to be able to say something about yourself. So some people will use it to very carefully fashion a particular type of self-presentation. And that's fine. That's a form of agency. That's a form of exerting your self. And so you have to have a purpose.
Strategic self-disclosure is what you call it.
Yeah, you have to, everything that you say, you should assume will be public, so to speak. And so in that sense, you want to present yourself in a light that you like. And then you also want to use it for community. So I would say basically agency and community. So express your agency and build community using social media. And these two kind of broad goals, I think you cannot go wrong with social media particularly, and with most general media.
You mentioned that people are, they've glommed on to Facebook. In fact, it's the fourth most popular website on the internet. Some 800 million people around the world are members of Facebook. And it doesn't seem to be declining. And I'm wondering, what is the future of Facebook? And is there a social network that you anticipate will follow in its footsteps?
Well, Facebook is in fact become the general social networking site for most everybody now. So all of us are getting our even our parents and our professors onto that network. And one of the issues then becomes, do we not have boundaries? And we all, as humans, we like to have boundaries between our different circles. And so Facebook has tried very hard to create these different affordances within that technology for us to make these boundaries between friends, close friends, and so forth. Google Plus does that right from the get-go with circles and so forth. So in that sense, I see the future as us wanting to create these niches that we already have in our offline lives, where we have different circles that we sometimes don't like them to mingle with each other. And so we already have LinkedIn, which is like a professional networking kind of thing. So like that, I see a proliferation of kind of either topic-specific or group-specific kind of social networking niches. But Facebook will continue to be kind of the kind of the be-all for everybody, the go-to place for everything about yourself. So you put your vacation pictures, you put your personal thoughts that anybody from all the different circles can see, but for more private or more kind of specific information, you would go on to other social networking sites.
How concerned are you that all of this attention to these virtual worlds diminishes our attention to real life?
Well, this is an age-old question. Whenever there's a new medium, people say that it kind of robs us of their offline kind of lives or richness of our. But one of the trends that I'm seeing in my own work and with some of the data from studies is indeed Facebook, for example, is used a whole lot to enhance offline lives. A lot of the apps that you see, location-based services that have come on to mobile devices now, like Foursquare and things, the charm is in going to some strange place and hooking up with people through their location proximity. That is, you're closer to somebody and therefore you can meet up with them. So my undergrads tell me that if you're not on Facebook, you don't get invited to parties.
You don't exist. That's part of it.
And so to have an offline life that is meaningful, it's almost become necessary to have an online. So in a way, it's like a business card. When you meet somebody for the first time, or maybe the second time, you say, check me out on Facebook, friend me on Facebook kind of thing, is a way of maintaining contact between offline meetings. And so most research that has kind of looked at how offline lives get diminished have not been, at least for the long term, have not been successful in establishing that it has somehow robbed the richness away from offline lives. That indeed all these online
Although
media
some
are
will
helping.
complain that they'll get on a plane, for example, and rather than having a conversation with their seatmate,
Right.
they're both sitting with earbuds and iPads and telephones, but not communicating in real life, in real time.
Right, and one has to question whether that is necessarily a meaningful, need. Just because you're neighbors, whether you're neighbors in an airplane or neighbors in your neighborhood, doesn't make you like-minded. You might have a very rich conversation with somebody in Norway through that device because you and that person share something intellectually meaningful, that you have something in common. Just because you happen to be next to somebody in an airplane seat doesn't mean that necessarily you connect, and nor is there necessity any longer for us to connect in that sense. So what is geographical proximity in that sense? It's just the fact that you're next to each other. That does not guarantee meaningful exchange, meaningful communication necessarily.
Explain how this new media is shifting norms and changing etiquette. For example, you testified before Congress, and one former congressman was talking on a cell phone as you testified.
Right. This was way back when, I think probably in the late 1990s. And the etiquette had not yet, was not yet in place. There was no known way in which people were expected to act. So in those days, when you got a cell phone call, that meant it was super urgent. You were summoned to action.
It was the red phone, the bat phone.
Yeah, and so you had to kind of take it. There was no, but once it became so common that everybody could have their cell phones, it became uncool to kind of interrupt a offline conversation by picking up the cell phone kind of thing. So in that sense, I think our etiquette, especially when it comes to public use of these so-called personal media, is kind of still evolving as more and more personal media kind of emerge. I don't think people mind. We've kind of come, I think, a full circle. Now I don't think people mind others picking up the cell phone as much.
In fact, students text in your classroom and you're okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways I feel like that is encouraging back-channel conversation about the topics that I'm talking about. So in a way, it helps them negotiate that material that I'm discussing in their own way and with each other. So that provides one of the problems I have with the traditional classroom is everybody is just focused on the lecture. So there could be 300 people, but there's no sense of community amongst them. They're all together only physically, but there's not that much interaction in your typical kind of lecture-based class. And so I think tools of new media can be used effectively to create these kinds of back-channel conversations among them and to even exchange notes, or sometimes I even encourage them to go ahead, Google it and tell me what it says, in the middle of a lecture. And then they would all give me answers. And so there's another person would say, no, wait a minute, I found this. And then they'll recall something that they saw in their personal networks, So that gets them talking about the issue.
There are lots of people who assume that the United States is the most advanced when it comes to communications and to new media. You say actually South Korea is more advanced in terms of technology and communications.
Yeah, I think a lot of countries have leapfrogged. They've not gone through all the steps that U.S. has had to go through. U.S. is an innovator, and so it does go through different technologies. But some will skip technology and kind of jump ahead. And I was on sabbatical in Korea whole of last year, and I saw, the kind of diffusion of mobile devices and people in crowded subways. They'll be watching TV, and they'll even be having video chats with other people in other subway cars across the city, things that I don't see here in the U.S. as much. So I feel like some countries, the bandwidth is much bigger. The infrastructure from the get-go, they have kind of established it such that they can have all these heavy bandwidth kind of exchanges, including live video and live TV and so forth. So yes, I think a lot of other countries are moving ahead of U.S. But that's not to say that we are not innovative. We are indeed often considered the innovators for most of these new media technologies.
There are almost 7 billion people on the planet right now, and almost 4 billion active mobile phones. That's amazing. The trend is that there will be more people with cell phones than can read and write. In terms of diffusion, how does the cell phone compare to electricity or the advent of television? It seems to me that cell phones have been diffused through the population faster than electricity.
Yes, and in many ways because it does not need that kind of infrastructure. It's wireless and it comes in all kinds of price ranges from the cheapest. And so in underdeveloped parts of the world, especially in Africa and Asia, cell phones have become the norm. I mean, even farmers have cell phones. They do transactions on cell phone. There are whole new areas of research emerging, one of which is called ICT4D, Information and Communication Technologies for Development. So a lot of researchers are looking at how we can use mobile devices for enhancing development prospects of historically underdeveloped parts of the world in terms of agriculture, irrigation, transactions, fisheries and those kinds of things. And so it is the fact that it has diffused well can be very useful for a lot of social good that people can do. And the diffusion itself is being made possible because of the cost factor being so low, and there doesn't need to be an infrastructure for it to support. And so a lot of very poor farmers, for example, can afford some mobile phones, and they go to great lengths. There are underground economies where they actually have one person bicycling through the village to come charge your cell phones because there's no electricity even in some parts. So cell phones are actually quite prevalent and quite popular even in areas of the world where there's no daily electricity, and there's some person who'll come bicycling through and give you the replacement phone to charge while he goes and charges it overnight and brings it back.
And we see the power that this has. Messages by cell phone, texting and twittering have toppled dictators, elected new presidents, brought aid to people in the instance of natural disasters.
Right. I think in that sense it's very empowering, not simply because it gives people access to whatever the network that they are seeking, but also because there are lots of these social media applications within mobile devices so that people know that there are other people like them, and then it affords the sense of community that people can build around that device. It's not any longer just about interpersonal communication with one person talking to their friends, but it's about mobilizing. And so it has a mobilizing kind of effect when so many people have mobile devices. Yeah.
What role would you say Twitter and mobile devices had in, let's say, the scandal that unfolded at Penn State?
Well, it did help mobilize quickly those people who wanted to stage a demonstration or a protest or some kind of rally or a vigil. They were able to quickly announce to everybody where they were going to meet. This is kind of like how Facebook is used to organize parties among undergrads. So in that sense, this is for a good thing in a way. And so in that sense, it's become a good mobilizing force because everybody is kind of on it, and it's a private network in a way, even though it's a large network. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about reliability. You're talking about a college population, and many say that young people are the most web literate. And yet researchers did a study where they posed a number of questions to students, and they went to the web, searched them, and the very top list of things that came up on Google were the things that they used to answer the questions, not detecting that the researchers had scrambled the list so that a profile about Martin Luther King that was written by white supremacists wasn't detected, and things like that. So I'm wondering just really how savvy we are. The person from Wired who wrote this article talked about how low crap detection is really when it comes to web searches.
Yeah, I think what happens is, along with this explosion in information revolution that has been made possible with these new media, has come this need for us to economize on our cognitive resources. So we are all cognitive misers. We won't do more work than we have to. So what you cited is an example of what I call a prominence heuristic. Heuristic is these mental shortcuts that we use.
Prominence as it's at the top of the Google search.
Exactly.
Okay.
So just like headline size is given, it gives you a sense of the prominence of the story in a newspaper, coming up on a search engine as the top hit is a kind of a cue for prominence. For the most part, it works. For the most part, Google searches are pretty reliable in that sense, unless some researcher goes and scrambles it up for them. So they don't scrutinize the content, but they make decisions based on where it is placement as well as availability of cues. Like, for example, you could have a very crappy book, but that's 5 stars. But the fact that it's 5 stars indicates that a lot of other people are buying it, so I should probably think about buying it as well. So that's what we call the bandwagon heuristic. So like this, there are lots of these cues that are available to us, essentially to help us manage this information overload. And we are at some psychological level reliant on these heuristics or mental shortcuts, and they do help us with that. This also raises the other issue of media literacy. So people need to be aware that indeed it's not foolproof, that it's not 100% of the case that it's true, and that there are algorithms out there that might actually be wrong or may not serve your purpose well. And so as educators, we have, I think, a real responsibility in trying to make sure that our students and the future generations don't rely too much on heuristics, but then realize that they do operate with heuristics, that knowledge itself can be pretty empowering in terms of making sure that they are on alert sometimes, especially when they are involved and this is a high stakes decision kind of thing.
How reliable, for the most part, is the information that we find online?
The fact that the information is kind of constantly being updated, and there are a lot of experts that are mindful of the accuracy of the content. They correct each other. And that's really the power of any kind of wiki. And so Wikipedia is no exception. So it's there was a book out a while back called Wisdom of the Crowds, which basically talks about how the crowds together, everybody put together, collaborating together, will have more wisdom than any one person kind of thing. So in my personal experience, a lot of what I see online is reliable, especially when you're talking about kind of educational content. And we have certain rules in media literacy about how to verify information, just like journalists have rules to verify with 2 different sources and those kinds of things. So if you apply those rules, you can, within the realm of online media, disambiguate misinformation and arrive at fairly reliable information, credible information.
This new media is empowering, and I think back to the fact that you spent 8 years as a print journalist. And today, for instance, someone like Tiger Woods doesn't need to ever speak to a journalist. He can decide what he wants the public to know by posting it on his own Facebook page, and he can avoid the uncomfortable questions. I'm wondering how concerned you are about what that means for consumers.
Well, the nature of the intermediaries has changed. So the intermediaries with old media used to be these professional journalists. They were the gatekeepers, so to speak, that all the public figures needed to kind of appeal to and talk to, so that they would be the conduits to the real masses. Now, most public figures have direct access, in a way, to the real masses. And so their gatekeepers tend to be the ultimate recipients. So if Tiger Woods posts something, and he sees 15 people with negative comments about it, he knows that there's been a misstep in the way he's kind of portrayed himself, and so he will go on to correct it, or he will take action that way. So it has cut out the intermediaries in a way. Some of these media have. But going forth, I think, in the long run, we'll come one full circle. We will become more dependent on intermediaries simply because of this issue of information overload that I talked about earlier. That is, we are not going to be able to keep up with all the different public figures. We're not going to be able to go to all their blogs or follow all of them on Twitter. So eventually we want some kind of professional
to synthesize all of this for us.
Intermediary to kind of say, and that's why we will have, but we will probably have a kind of a narrow range. There probably won't be as many newspapers. There will probably be just 2 or 3 good newspapers, 2 or 3 good television networks and so forth, that we would then say, these are people who are known for credibility and for gatekeeping, and we would value that and pay a price for that, actually.
What do you think interactivity will look like in the future?
Well, interactivity, in my mind, will look like in three different ways. It'll operate in three different ways. One is it'll allow users to manipulate their way through information in their own different way. There are lots of tools. You can zoom in on certain parts. You can go to Google Map and Google Earth. You can do your own kind of investigation, so to speak. The second way in which interactivity can affect is in making the user himself or herself the source of information. So they can actually customize the information. They can create their own portals, but also they can blog. And they can create their own gadgets and stuff like that. So in that sense, interactivity can be more of a source feature. And interactivity can also be as a message feature, which is the degree to which you have a back and forth chatter with other people. So there's going to be a lot more chatting. That's interactivity as a message feature. There's going to be a lot more agency. That's interactivity as a source feature. And then there's going to be a lot of tinkering with the medium by the user. That's interactivity as kind of a medium feature. So these things, source, medium, message, are classic elements of any communication model. And so as a communication researcher, I foresee all these elements of a communication model being affected by this new affordance that we call interactivity.
All right, Shyam Sundar, thank you so much for talking with us.
You're most welcome. Pleasure being here.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Shyam Sundar. Comcast subscribers can watch this program anytime on Penn State On Demand. Find out how through our website, conversations.psu.edu, where you'll find more information on the effects of social media. I'm Patty Satalia. We hope you'll join us for our next Conversation from Penn State.
If you've enjoyed Conversations from Penn State and would like to purchase a DVD of this show or any of our other episodes, order online at mediasales.psu.edu or call 1-800-770-2111.
Production funding provided in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you. Thank you.
This has been a production of WPSU.